they do.
Okay. Okay, that's sharing okay? Good. Okay, thank you very much, Ambretta. I'm a white male. I'm here in my studio in Southeast England. And I was just going to give you a little bit of talk about my practice and take you underwater and show you some of the projects I've been involved in around the world. And I actually started off in around 2006 in the Caribbean. I came from an art background. I studied at the London Institute of Arts. And I also became sort of fascinated with the marine world, and I became a diving instructor. And I was just fascinated that, you know, we live on this blue planet and 2/3 of it is covered in water, but it's so sort of little understood, and it still has, you know, people have very different connotations to it. They have these preconceptions about what lies beneath the waves. And I wanted to sort of use artwork to start to explore that relationship. But then I also started to realize that by working underwater, it also had a kind of regenerative effect by creating artificial reefs. So I started in Grenada. I worked with the local community in making sculptures of local school children, and then placed them in this bay where they started to sort of be colonized by the natural environment. And this particular piece, which was called Vicissitudes, was in an area that was on the sort of edge of the reef, and it changed according to, you know, what part got more sunlight, what area had more current, seasonal changes. And I sort of really got into this, you know, this transformation. And it was a bit like Bill said earlier, I didn't really have a sort of a huge kind of worldwide view for this. I just started small, and I wanted to, you know, just to create these small pockets of marine life. But it's all sort of started to expand, and I realized that, you know, when I created this, it would actually draw tourists away from other fragile areas. And that was actually having a much sort of greater effect on the conservation of the coastline. So I sort of decided to kind of amplify it. And I moved to Mexico in the Caribbean Sea. And I realized the underwater space is such a vast area that in order to have any kind of impact on creating a reef and to drawing people away from natural areas was to sort of really scale up the works. So I went, this is almost 450 human casts of the local community. And I tried to sort of get people from all different walks of life, local fishermen, school teachers, tourists, some of the community center that I was working at. And this is kind of a little demonstration of how it changes. And things happen very, very quickly underwater. You know, you put an object in, and then within, you know, days, weeks, it's already started to get a thin film of algae. You get calcareous worms, you get this pink coralline algae. And so it dramatically changes. And again, I started to also work with a local reef organization in taking cuttings of coral. And with those, you could actually dictate the growth and help shape the sculptures in a certain way. And this is how it started to get colonized after, I think this is around 3 or 4 years. And so the idea is all the pieces have these intricate void systems in, so that all these creatures can, you know, take refuge from being predated on. And I also started to sort of focus on individual species. These are sort of some of the close-ups. I was always really fascinated by how the sculptures tended to sort of become alive. They gain these capillaries and veins and networks of organisms that, you know, transport you know, nutrients around their bodies. And yeah, it was really fascinating. Just on the sculpture on the left, as you know, I think a marine biologist documented over sort of 80 different species. I started to also home in on particular issues. There was a current situation where all the fishermen were extracting too many lobsters, and so I was looking at ways of trying to sort of make them harder to pull out from their hiding places. So they ended up this lobster city being built inside a VW Beetle, which was a very iconic symbol in Mexico. And eventually it started to colonize, so all the lobsters could actually go in the doors through the sides, and the fishermen were unable to actually extract them. And it was really successful. Nothing happened for several years. But then I went back about 4 or 5 years ago, and the whole car was completely full of lobsters. And then after Mexico, I moved, I wanted to explore a different environment. I didn't just want to work in tropical areas and in Caribbean seas. I wanted to explore other oceans and seas. And this is in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Canary Islands. And again, I was sort of working in an area that was completely void of life initially. So it was a big sort of sandy bay. And this is where I started to sort of also work on pieces around climate change. This was called Crossing the Rubicon. And I was really, really surprised by how much this also aggregated life. It was an area, you know, that I presumed wasn't going to be as rich in biodiversity as the Caribbean. But I was actually incredibly surprised that, you know, this temperate water was just a mecca for marine life. And this was only after 1 year, and because these sculptures and installations were put in one particular area, it kind of drew all the different creatures from the surrounding coastline and aggregated them in this one place. This was another large-scale installation with around 300 sculptures in it, called Human Jaya. And a lot of the works I'm trying to sort of talk about the fragility of humanity, you know, how we're subject to its currents, its rhythms, its cycles, and how ultimately we need to, you know, adjust our relationship with it. This obviously has lots of sort of intricate nooks and crannies and lots of areas for marine life to take refuge in. So this was, I think, after 6 months. I also did some pieces within the same installation. Most of them I tried to sort of create either a sculpture park or a museum, with an idea that, you know, tourists and visitors can actually visit the sites for around, you know, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and it become an actual, you know, a guided visit. This was a piece called The Raft of Lampedusa. The Canary Islands have been used as a stopping point into Europe for many years, and I kind of wanted to, you know, tell as many regional stories as possible through the sculptures. This is close-ups of how they changed in this different environment. These are all white calcareous worms with barnacles and lots of different types of algae. I also wanted to work in different environments again, and this is in London, in the Thames, actually on the opposite side of the riverbank to Tate Britain, by the MI5 building. And this was a bit of a sort of political piece, so a piece around climate change and fossil fuels, relating to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And these were actually completely submerged and revealed by the tide twice a day. So it was almost 9 meters of water that would come up, completely inundate them. And then a few hours later, they were revealed again. And you could actually walk along the side of the millbank and see them. This is it as it's, yeah, the waters are rising up. Further on the theme of exploring different environments, this was a site in Oslo. And I'm really fascinated by bodies of water that we don't necessarily think harbour as much life as they do. And this was an inner city fjord that was heavily polluted, but right, you know, in a bustling environment. And it was a site that was quite interesting for me because it actually froze over in the winter. So this is with the ice formations above it. And this is actually a floating sculpture, so it's tethered to the sea floor, and floats just beneath the ice. And this was the piece almost 6 months after it was installed. And all of the materials I used for the sculptures, they're all made from a pH neutral and inert material that actually allows colonization to occur and allows them to be in situ for a very long time. And I was really
Jason, you're at 5 minutes.
Okay. I don't know if you can see, but there's lots of little shrimps living there, and these sea squirts. And just in this one area, these few sculptures started to sort of aggregate all this different life. And so we started to get fish that would come in and feed on the shrimps and feed on the the different algae that were growing on it. These fish then sort of encouraged larger predators to come along. I was actually diving there at one point, and I saw a seagull that was swimming underwater, actually picking off some of the mussels and barnacles on the pieces. And it actually started off this whole sort of chain of life till ultimately we got some seals that started living on the sculptures, the sort of apex predators. And this particular installation has a floating piece that indicates where the underwater works are. Moving on to the Maldives and the Indian Ocean. I wanted to again work on this tidal theme. So this was creating an artificial reef in the middle of a lagoon, but I wanted to try to use the installation to actually control the visitors. So it was the visitors that were contained in this cube, but the marine life could actually come and go and come and go as it pleases. And within the installation, there were several other pieces, playing with this idea of rising waters. Obviously, the Maldives are very much at the forefront of climate change and rising sea levels. Then for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I've been working in Australia on the Great Barrier Reef. And I've been working with some science institutions there in the Townsville region. And we've all heard the stories about how our seas are warming and how there's a lot of coral bleaching taking place along the Great Barrier Reef. But a lot of things that happen underwater feel sort of so out of sight and out of mind that I don't feel it's hard to feel empathy for things when they're so distant from our normal lives. So this particular piece is called Ocean Siren. It's a young indigenous woman from the area, and she's holding a shell, which was a traditional communication device. And she's linked up to a series of underwater monitoring stations that inform in real time of the temperature out on the reef. So the idea is that she starts to change color according to what temperature the reef is. And the reef is almost 7 kilometers from shore. And it's sort of, this is placed in an urban environment, and it's meant to sort of, be a sort of bridge or a connecting point to this reef that's, so far out at sea. Also within the same installation, or the same project, I should say, is this coral greenhouse. And it's a sort of a large-scale structure, and it has a series of artificial reef units that are all built within it. And you can see, and we're doing a sort of series of coral propagation tests. The community in Australia is one of the sort of leading communities on reef science, and some of the biggest institutions are there. So the idea is this is kind of almost like an underwater laboratory or citizen science area. And we're doing a series of tests and working out on where the best sort of placements of corals and what are the optimum conditions for them. This is moving back again, back to Europe, off the coast of France, in an area of Posidonia sea meadows, seagrass meadows. And I was interested in looking at a different environment, and this was an area off the coast of Cannes, where it was heavily used by recreational boats and swimmers and water users. And it'd been used for ages for also dumping old pipes and engines and old machinery. So part of the project was to create these marine protected areas and zone off the coastline so that there was no anchoring in place that was significantly damaging these seagrass meadows. And so this,
Jason, 1 minute to go.
1 minute to go, almost there. And so this was a particular piece, and it was all about how we never really understand the sea. We only see it from its surface, and we don't see what the sort of, the beauty beneath. And then finally, I've spent the last year working in Cyprus in the Mediterranean, and this idea of sort of reforesting our oceans and creating artworks that go from the seafloor up to the surface. And it's this sort of three-dimensional space that aggregates marine life on all different levels. And so it's, I think it's like a sort of series of around 90 different sculptures, obviously in sort of hybrid tree formations. And then finally, I just thought I'd end with one of the initial sculptures that I first showed in Grenada. And this is the piece after almost 15 years, 16 years. And you can see there's lots of hard corals and sponges. And I always feel that artwork is always subjective, but when I go to sort of visit these artworks, just the fact that they've created something living and something breathing is what sort of makes it all worthwhile for me. And that's it. So thank you very much.
That was such a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Jason. And again, having witnessed one of your sites in person, I'm an avid diver, and I think I'll just have to put on my bucket list everything else you've been doing and start exploring. And maybe one day we'll be able to explore together. It would be phenomenal.
No problem. Thank you very much.